Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Firstly, I would like to extend the regards of Dr. Ghaith Fariz, Director of the UNESCO Regional Bureau for Sciences in the Arab States, Cairo office, who was unable to attend due to circumstances beyond his control. On his behalf, I am pleased to welcome you all to the opening of this training workshop on national reporting for the UNESCO recommendation on science and scientific researchers. We are pleased to receive more than 70 nominations of experts from 15 Arab countries to participate in this workshop, and we thank the national commissions for that. This is great evidence of the importance that Arab countries attach to strengthening their science, technology, and innovation systems. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the recommendation on science and scientific researchers was adopted by some 195 states on 13 November 2017 during the 39th session of the UNESCO General Conference and replaces the 1974 recommendation on the status of scientific researchers. The revised recommendation covers 10 key priority areas such as research integrity, the responsibilities and rights of scientific researchers, the enabling environment of science, among others. The General Conference recommended that member states should provide periodic reports on their national efforts and experiences in implementing the recommendation on a 4-yearly basis. The first reports are due on 31 March 2021 and cover progress made during the period 2017 to 2020. National reports are very important because what cannot be measured cannot be managed or improved, and this applies to science, technology, and innovation systems. We are fully cognizant of the challenge that many countries in the Arab region and outside face to prepare such reports due to the limited availability of evidence and data on some of the recommendations' priority areas, especially that some are new areas for which member states have not yet put in place clear monitoring mechanisms. I mention here, just as an example, topics such as the interactions between science and society, the participation of scientific researchers in policy making, and free access to research results. Within this context, and in response to the request of member states, the UNESCO Regional Bureau in Cairo wished to support the Arab states in preparing their reports on the recommendation, and accordingly organized this training workshop, which aims to present and discuss some of the practical tools and simple mechanisms that are available and which could facilitate the collection of evidence and data required for the national reports. We are pleased to have with us two international experts, Dr. Guillermo Lemarchand, lead expert on the GoSpin methodology, and Dr. Eric Jensen, lead scientific advisor for the R-Ring project, as well as Dr. April Tash, UNESCO Secretariat focal point for the recommendation. We hope that you will find this workshop useful and that you will be encouraged to prepare national reports on the recommendation. We at the UNESCO Regional Bureau for Sciences in the Arab States remain ready to offer all possible technical support in that respect. Thank you, and I wish you a fruitful workshop.
Thank you, Dr. Bashir, for this welcoming note. We'd like to now give the floor, and we will now, of course, resort to the English language. And if you'd like to listen to the interpretation, please choose your language from the buttons below.
Shared earlier with you, the recommendation sets a common ground for science throughout the world, in line with existing international standards. It also describes good practices that countries should move towards. And all countries, as also Dr. Bisher has mentioned, have committed to report on the recommendation every 4 years. And the first report, as you know, is due end of March 2021, so in a little bit more than 2 months. The report would basically assess the scientific enterprise or the science system, if you may call it, in your country, as it relates to the various dimensions of the UNESCO recommendation, which are basically 10 areas. We are glad at UNESCO Cairo to accompany you in this reporting process because we know it's challenging. So we want to ease your efforts in the aim of, as the main aim of this training. We hope that your countries can participate from the start to produce a good first report. Now, of course, you may ask, what is the benefit for this? Why should I do a report that perhaps can just be shelved or not used? But you know very well that by looking at all of the science system aspects, each 4 years, you are very likely to see patterns, to derive actionable insights, and accordingly to take corrective measures. So the national report is really meant to be a powerful and useful exercise. Just before also we continue, I would really like to ask for a show of hands, or so if you can raise your hand if you are or have been designated by your government as part of a team to submit a national report. So basically, is your country submitting a national report? And if so, are you a member of the team doing so? Can we see a show of hands in that respect? Okay, I see Dr. Khalid, Dr. Aisha. Some people are raising their hands in the physically, but bear in mind I don't always I'm not always able to see you because you know not all of you fit on this same screen. But so good. So maybe at least we have a few, and maybe some of you may not even be aware if such a report is being prepared. But I hope at least that by the end of this training, basically you will learn enough about these reports to consider them as a useful endeavor. And so also before I start, I would like to bring your attention to a key document that we shared with you as part of the background documentation for this event, and which is the letter sent by the UNESCO Director General to all member countries in October 2020. So a few months ago. It's called the Guidelines for Preparing National Report. And if you've gone through it, it reads like a survey. So it asks for specific information. It asks questions that some are easy to answer. Like, for example, let's say in the last 4 years, has any public measure been taken to increase the number of scientists? Or has any consultation taken place with the science community to better implement the recommendation? Has the text of the recommendation been translated, etc.? But it also unfortunately asks some difficult questions, such as, are there measures to encourage uses of research by government? So the science policy, if you want, interface. Other questions such as, how much access do students and the public have to published scientific knowledge? Has the career mobility been adjusted to modern standards? Do appraisal system includes incentives for sharing and mentoring among researchers? Or are there mechanisms to support ethics, deliberation, and accountability? So in sum, the national report will have to address some easy, but also some difficult questions. So how should you answer the difficult questions? Of course, you will want to check whether existing data is available. New areas, you may also want to collect new data.
but you must do that really in an intelligent and efficient way by asking the right questions. So in this training, we will present an approach for how you can do this. Now, my colleague, Dr. April Tash of the UNESCO Secretariat, who is the focal point for the recommendation, was supposed to say more words on this, but I don't see her present. I'm sure she's having some technical difficulty. April, if you're there, do give a sign. But otherwise, I will just let you know the program, how it's going to run today and tomorrow. So today, for the rest of the day, we will have an expert who has really designed the approach for assessing policies in science. It's called a Global Observatory. And the national reports are to be, for the first time, made online and integrated into this pre-existing online platform called GoSpin. And so our guest, Dr. Guillermo Lemarchand, will speak to us about this from his home in Argentina. As for tomorrow, and because the world is not really always ideal, we will talk to you about how the reporting can be done with good results, even in the absence of perfect data. Okay, and to help us with that, Dr. Eric Jensen will introduce his expertise in designing tailored mini surveys that you can roll out and collect information about selected key areas of the 10 key areas of the recommendation, especially those where there has never been before data collected. So this will help you really with the troubleshooting. It is our intention that today and tomorrow you have an overview that exposes the options available to you for how you can proceed. And that can help you, as I said, in the reporting exercise, which again, we see as an opportunity to capture sufficient snapshot of data to really serve science governance. So without further ado, I think I will give the floor, unless somebody has any questions, maybe, or to ask, or something is not clear about how the workshop will be run. I see a hand. I see. Okay, Fatin, you want to go ahead? Although I just as a note, if you can use the electronic hand, because otherwise I might not always be able to see you. Fatin, faddali.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting us to this very valuable workshop. Sure. Hi, Jeanne, how are you? I hope you're well. I've attended a UNDP program a few years ago, and they follow, of course, I think it was the Stockholm method of collecting data and doing the reports. And I think there was a UNESCO expert at the time. This was in Amman, Jordan. My question is, a lot of these points that you put down, for example, have there been measures? I think that's subjective. Wouldn't a better or a different kind of KPI be how many people have gone out for PhDs, how many have come back with PhDs, how many have been employed in this and this and this sector? I'm thinking, but when you say measures, the measures, what are they? Different countries have different policies, different measures, and those questions need to be very unsubjective, or so as to say, countable, surveyable.
I see your point. Yes, absolutely. I see your point. Thank you, Fatin. And I think you've gone a little bit ahead of us. Let's, by all means, this is a very valid questions, and I'm sure we'll address that in our workshop. So, but at this point, maybe just to make sure that at least the program for today and tomorrow is clear for everybody. And then we can start. So any other questions, or I think we're fine. So Guillermo, I think the floor is yours to start your presentation. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I will see if I can share the screen. Let's check. Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yes, absolutely. It's showing now.
Okay. Let's see if I can start the presentation. because it's not really working. Okay, there. Okay, thank you very much. I would like to start giving my appreciation to Dr. Grace Faris, Director of the UNESCO Regional Bureau for Science in the Arab States, for allowing me to participate today from Buenos Aires, Argentina, to Dr. Bisher Imam, also representative of UNESCO in Cairo, to Hannah Elbaba, Program Specialist from the Cairo office, and April Tash, Program Specialist from UNESCO headquarters, which were so kind to invite me for this training workshop. Finally, I would like to extend my recognition to the different delegates from the Arab states and also to the interpreters, which will have the different tasks to translate our presentation into Arabic. Thank you very much to all of you. Today, I was invited to give an overview on how UNESCO is measuring and reporting about the characteristics and performance of national research and innovation systems. For doing so, we will describe the methodological approach used by UNESCO's Global Observatory of Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy Instruments, or just GOSPIN from here on. So the lecture will be divided in 3 parts. The first one, let me see because okay. The first one, why we will use the GOSPIN online platform for in the 2017 recommendation. In the section, we will present an overview of the different dimensions of the GOSPIN program. This will take around 50 minutes, and after that, we will have around 5 minutes for questions and answers. The second part is the hardcore of the presentation. We will introduce an overview of the GOSPIN methodological approach and how we are planning to use that methodological approach in order to make the follow-up of the 2017 recommendation. This part will take around 40 minutes, and after that, we will have around 15 minutes for question and answer. Finally, I will try to make a brief description of the 3 main templates of the GOSPIN survey. And probably this part of the presentation will be split, the first part today and the second part tomorrow morning, tomorrow. So the idea is why we need to use the GOSPIN program to report on the national advances in the implementation of the 2017 recommendation on science and scientific research. The short answer is quite simple. A few months ago, UNESCO Executive Board took that decision. However, the full answer will be explained during this presentation. So, in order to use the GOSPIN program to report on the recommendation, we need to see how well the GOSPIN surveys covers the 48 different items which are spread within the 6 chapters of the recommendation. Here we have in this view graph the description of the different chapters and the number of different items that are included in each individual chapter. So in a first approach, the GOSPIN program was not designed to make the follow-up of the recommendation. However, we have been collecting most of the information related with the recommendation. At the end of this presentation, we will see how many of these list of items are already included within the GOSPIN platform. So what is GOSPIN? And GOSPIN is UNESCO's Global Observatory of Policies and Policy Instruments on Science, Engineering, Technology, and Innovation. The acronym that I will use now is SETI. Legal instruments, institutional ecosystems, contextual factors, and indicators on research and innovation. Please note that here on I will use this acronym SETI for Science, Engineering, Technology, and Innovation in order to enhance the importance of engineering activities for developing countries. Sometimes people think that scientific research includes engineering activities. This is not the case in a complete way. So the acronym, the traditional acronym STI, without explicitly mentioning engineering activities, is somehow misleading from a development perspective. There is a broad set of engineering activities that are key for sustainable development, which are not related with research and development. So, and I have to mention that the acronym SETI was originally conceived by African scholars in the early 90s. So this is some interesting view that was originally foreseen in the African continent. So the program was originally developed for this type of uses. I will not read the biograph. You will receive a copy of this biograph, but essentially the program was designed to help member states, developing planning agencies, people in the academy, all the different stakeholders that are directly involved in the design, implementation, and evaluation of science, engineering, technology, and innovation policies. So why GoSpin? We realize that effective SETI policies are key to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and GoSpin is an excellent monitoring tool for them to define new STI roadmaps. And I will try to show that we are doing that. We are analyzing how the different policies and policy instruments that are implemented elsewhere can be used to trace how well the SDGs are implemented in any given country. GoSpin is also a methodology for mapping information on SETI policies, national SETI ecosystems and their organizations, SETI legal frameworks, operational policy instruments, and indicators for providing evidence-based policy analysis. And GoSpin performs capacity building activities, collects new information on SETI policies, publishes country profiles, provides standard setting instruments through the GoSpin manual, and the GoSpin online platform is a tool for analyzing SETI policies, and now, since a few months ago, for monitoring the implementation of the 2017 recommendation. So the GoSpin original program was designed covering 6 different components or activities. Let me see if I can here. So we can divide it in capacity building tools, and here we have the GoSpin methodological approach based on the GoSpin manual or Paris manual, the GoSpin training workshops that are performed at national basis. We invited around between 40 and 60 national officers from different ministries in the country that are related with science, technology, engineering, and innovation activities. And we train them for around 12 to 14 hours during the whole week in order to prepare them to complete the GoSpin surveys that which the national officials through them will get new skills to detect gaps in the SETI policy implementation. Then we have the governance and analytic tools that are essentially the GoSpin country profiles, the GoSpin online platform, and the Foresight and Technical Studies series. And as we mentioned before, since a few months ago, a new component was added to the GoSpin program, the follow-up of the 2017 recommendation. So since November 2012, UNESCO have organized more than 20 GoSpin training workshops in different countries in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the Arab states. Particularly, as one colleague mentioned before, in 2018, we organized with other UN agencies training workshop where a chapter, one of the lectures was devoted to the GoSpin. I was responsible of doing that. That was organized in Amman. Here we have a photograph of the participants there. But also in 2018, we organized a national workshop in Beirut. So due to the pandemic, the first GoSpin virtual training was performed a few months ago in Kenya. So since November 2013, UNESCO has published around 10 different volumes of the GoSpin country profile series, which is the most detailed study on SETI policies and policy instruments, usually covering the evolution of the research and innovation policies and ecosystems over the last 60 years. The process starts with a 12-14 training workshops for 40 to 60 national officials, as I mentioned before, which will be then in charge of completing the GoSpin surveys. Usually they need between 3 to 6 months to complete those surveys. After that, we start analyzing the information provided by them, and we make an statistical analysis based on historical information collected since the 1950s in each individual countries. We use the archives of UNESCO that has a lot of studies on science, technology, and innovation that were performed in different countries since the early 60s. And we complete the information, making a survey of all the academic publications that are in the specialized literature. It takes us between 3 to 6 months to prepare a 300 to 400 pages draft. And then after completing the first draft, we initiate a long peer reviewing and editing process, which ends with in the organization of a validation workshop with the participation of all the national stakeholders in the country. With the different comments that we receive in that validation workshop, we prepare the real third draft. And then we start a second peer reviewing process through the different UNESCO's internal boards that takes around 1 to 2 months to complete it. And we need around 1 month more to make the design, the layout design, and start proofreading all the material. The whole process takes no less than 6 months to 1 year to be completed. But we are very proud of the results that we have obtained from all these different volumes. Usually member states are very happy with them because they detect gaps in the implementation of their policy, and these volumes collects all the available information in all the different dimensions for the past 60 years in terms of science, technology, and innovation activities. Each country profile, each volume follows a strict standardized model. They have the same 12 chapters plus a series of appendices. Each chapter has the same type of sections and the same types of figures and tables. Then differences between one country and another are usually based in the content and amount of information available in each country. Here we present a description of the main contents of each individual chapter. You will have this view graph. I will not spend time reading it, but let me call you the attention to the chapter number 9, 10, and 11. In chapter number 9, we prepare a full inventory of all SETI government bodies and organizations related both to research and innovation and to science and technology services. I will come back to this context later on. We prepare in chapter 10 a full inventory of all the legal framework, including acts, bills, regulation, and international agreements on SETI. And particularly this chapter 10 is clearly the most important chapter where most of the country will be able to collect information in relation with the follow-up of the recommendation, because the recommendation is an international document that suggests the member states how to adequate their internal legislation to promote scientific research and to promote the rights of the scientific researchers. So, and in general, those measurements are taken by designing appropriate internal legislation. So by having the complete legal framework and inventory of the complete legal framework of a given country, it is very easy to check whether the different items that were proposed in the 2017 recommendation are included or not. Then the last most important chapter in relation with the recommendation is also the standard inventory of, that is using 25 different analytic dimensions of what we call, and I will explain later, the operational policy instruments. So then we have the GoSpin platform. In November 2018, we launched it in Paris, the GoSpin platform, which has information from around now 70 developing countries on SETI policies, policy instruments, national ecosystems, STI legal frameworks, around 300 temporal series of indicators, a digital library with access to national development plans, national STI policies. The whole platform is a cluster of 33 different databases, and the software includes something close to 4 million code lines. It's a very sophisticated software. Just to make a full description of how to use the different items that the platform has, I will need around 2 hours to explain all the different menus and the different layers of information that the platform has. I will suggest you will receive the copy of this presentation to check and explore the platform. The platform now is in 3 languages, English, French, and Spanish, but the software is already prepared to have the platform also in Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. Unfortunately, UNESCO didn't have enough human resources and financial resources to translate the whole information of the platform to these other 3 languages. We hope that in the future, the Arabic is clearly the most important language that should be included in the platform because of the large amount of countries that are using this language as the mother tongue. So we were willing to make probably an agreement with the Arab states in order to have this platform already translated into the Arabic in the near future. So we have also the Foresight and Technical Studies series. For instance, we applied the GoSpin methodological approach to prepare the first institutional profile, particularly on the Islamic Development Bank, which was used to redesign the bank structure in order to implement a series of funding mechanisms to promote research and innovation in their member states. We have also published a foresight analysis of the evolution of the techno-economic paradigms in Latin America and the Caribbean. So the idea is, we realize that the methodological approach is very useful for different sort of things. And the idea is, with this methodological approach, we are trying to learn how to see things in a different way beyond the traditional indicators approach, try to see which are the real policy interventions and how to measure the effects that those policy interventions generates in a given ecosystem. Let me see. Also, the GoSpin methodological approach has been used by the United Nations Interagency Task Team on science, technology, and innovation for the SDGs. For the SDGs, this particular group developed, based on the GoSpin methodological approach, a methodology in order to generate a guidebook for the preparation of the STI for the SDGs roadmap. This publication is a very recent one. It was published a few months ago, but essentially it includes some sort of transdisciplinary approach in order to see the correlation between the different dimensions of development, particularly to see how the STI policy interventions affect in a direct way the different SDGs. We already mentioned that GoSpin will be used to make the follow-up on the recommendation. And tomorrow, my colleague will explain how to take this very quick survey with 10 big measurements. And but I will leave this description for my colleague. So I think that I use my time in 15 minutes. So I will give the floor for question. We have 5 minutes for questions.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Guillermo. And please, if you have any questions, now is the time. Based on what you've heard, you can either raise your hand, or if you prefer, to write in the chat in English or Arabic, actually. Any reactions, perhaps, to what you have heard? Any challenges you foresee, perhaps? Ms. Nada, would you like to say your question?
أستاذة ندى، هل تودينا مشاركة سؤالك؟
اتفضلي أستاذة ندى.
Hello, may the peace of Allah be upon you. Can you hear me clearly?
I have a question regarding the GoSpin tool. I think it's a good tool, and thank you for the presentation. My question is regarding the other entities that do the same thing. For example, there is a platform that's called the Innovation Policy Platform, and I think it's developed by the World Bank, and they're gathering sort of the same data, statistics on research, development, and innovation, and the platform seems similar to this platform. So what is the relationship? Is there any relationship between you and the World Bank? Does your surveys feed into the other platforms, or do their surveys feed into, and their statistics feed into your tool? Is there a relationship, and what is the relationship between this platform and the platforms that are launched by other internal organizations that do a similar exercise?
Okay, I really understand. Actually, let me tell you, historically speaking, UNESCO was the first institution who started developing this type of approach by a platform. That was as early as 2009. At that time, the World Bank, nor the World Bank, nor OECD, only the European Union was trying to do something similar. The Gospel program was launched in 2011, in November of 2011, and originally started as the platform alone. Not all the other dimensions came later. What happened? In 2011, UNESCO has the big financial crisis. And the funding that we had originally at that time for developing that project evaporated in the first week that we start working in the implementation of that. So we have to redesign the program. At that time, the World Bank associated with the OECD, and they got the idea that we present in the workshop, because World Bank, OECD, and other international organizations, the European Union, were there. And at that time, they started investing around $2 million per year to develop this innovation platform. And it is true, the methodological approach is similar, it's not the same. However, the countries that we have in one platform and the other are different. In the innovation platform, you will find most of the information is related with developed countries, mainly the OECD's member states and the European Union member states. On the other hand, UNESCO's focuses on developing countries. Practically, you will not find at the UNESCO platform any developed country. We don't have time to reproduce the information that is also available in another platform. However, if you explore our platform, you will see that we have links with all the other platforms that are, because there are several other platforms that completes the different type of information. And on the other hand, the OECD World Bank platform also have a link to us, because the coverage of countries are different. So we divided the world. UNESCO took the responsibility of collecting information on developing countries, while the World Bank and OECD platform is collecting information on developed countries. Thank you very much.
Okay, Guillermo, in the chat, there were also a couple of questions regarding to access to the surveys and to the platform in general. I mean, anyone can access this platform and the surveys?
Yeah. To use the platform, it is totally free. I will explain details in the second part. So this first part was only an overview. The second part, I will talk more in details about the surveys and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And maybe perhaps that there is also a question that you may address later, like how is the data normalized?
Okay, no, that is the second part.
Yeah, this is a technical, I'm sure you will address.
Yes, Jenna.
Very good. تفضلي دكتورة حنان تفضلي.
Yeah. Thank you, Golmar, for really very nice presentation. In fact, I have a question. Maybe it's not a valid one, but you mentioned that the GoSpin is really good as monitoring approach or a tool for SDGs, the 17 SDGs. My question is there certain SDGs that the GoSpin will be more focused on, and also is it like a country priority? Because For example, in Jordan, I'm from Jordan, maybe SDG 1 and 2, the no hunger and the food, etc., and the gender equity might be the more focus for me or for us. So is the methodology really valid for all as a one package for all the 17 SDGs, or just like, certain SDGs per country? Thank you.
Okay. I will talk about later because this was only an introduction, but to give a short answer to this is the focus of the platform is to analyze science, engineering, technology, and innovation policies and policy instruments. So those policy interventions may be through the legal framework and through the operational policy instruments. I will talk about them later. When you mobilize funding in order to achieve certain policy goal, or when you establish a certain regulation in a given country, you are affecting some of different SDGs. Clearly, what we do is we analyze which is the effect that the different policy interventions related with science, technology, and innovation affects the different SDGs. Probably very few of them will be directly related with food or whatever. Most of them will be related with innovation, with education. However, that depends on the topology of the different policy intervention that each different country has. But in the platform, what we have done so far is to correlate each individual legal framework or individual public law or regulation or international agreement, how that legal framework is related with each individual target of an SDG. We have 17 different SDGs, but we have more than 100 different targets. So we are correlating the policy intervention with the targets. And in the platform, you can choose to obtain that information and to see how the different operational policy instruments and the legal framework are related with the individual SDGs. But I would like to go on now because the second part is probably the most difficult one for you. And I will not have enough time to go into all the details, but the idea is to have the opportunity to present you an overview of all the work that we have been doing with this project. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Guillermo, I know you need to proceed, but just to bring to your attention two other questions that maybe you can actually answer while you're presenting, like a question that once a country report is fully developed, how easy or difficult is it to update the report in GoSpin? That was one question.
Okay.
The other is also a worry from one of the participants about the time frame, because you said it takes like 6 months to collect data and another 6 months to process. So how relevant is this for this round of monitoring?
Okay. Let me say, remember that GoSpin has 6 different dimensions, and I was talking with those timelines. I was talking about the country profiles that are the most detailed study using the GoSpin methodological approach. But we also have the GoSpin platform. In the GoSpin platform, you collect information, you put all the information together. You don't make the type of analysis, comprehensive analysis that you have to make with the country profile. So, and the platform was designed that in a way that a focal point in each individual country can upload the new information directly into the platform. So if you already have uploaded information through a given survey. Let's say after 6 months of collecting the information, all that information was uploaded into the platform. Then if there is any new operational policy instrument, any new legal law or regulation act or international agreement that was issued afterwards, it is very simple to upload the new information into the platform directly from your own country. The platform was designed that in such a way that a focal point should be named by the local authorities, and we will give them access, a password, and we will train them in order to upload the information into a correct way. Then a person in UNESCO headquarters will check that the information was uploaded correctly, and the information will be online practically immediately. In the same day, you can upgrade the information. In that way, it's very easy. On the other hand, we have a deadline to submit the reporting on the first reporting on this recommendation, and we are not expecting that you will be able to submit all the information in the next 2 months. The idea is today is to give you an idea of the complexity of collecting information on innovation, research and innovation system, and all the dimensions that you should be looking for, and how this information is correlate with the type of requirements that the 2017 recommendation is asking us. So the idea is in such a way that we want to combine the efforts between the science sector, the natural science sector in UNESCO, and the social and human science sector in UNESCO to work together and to combine this effort in such a way that all the information should be reported through the GoSpin platform, which is only one of the now 7 components of the GoSpin program. So, and with that, I will stop the 5 minutes question. Otherwise, I will not be able to complete my presentation. And the idea of this presentation is to allow you to have an overview of what we are doing today. So we have to start saying that the Constitution of UNESCO establishes 5 main functions for the organization. First, laboratory of ideas. Second, standard setting. Third, clearing house. 4, capacity builder. And 5, catalyst for international cooperation. And based on this very clear mandate for UNESCO, we developed this theoretical framework, which is related with the 5 functions of UNESCO, in order to help member states to evaluate and design their own national research and innovation ecosystems, their STI policy instruments, and their STI regulatory frameworks through the GoSpin methodological approach. And now I will try to talk about how we can use this GoSpin platform to monitor the national implementation of this recommendation. But before going there, and quoting one of the comments that I think it was a colleague from Kuwait mentioned before, I will enhance the fact that all measurements, observations, experiment results, or indicators are always explicitly or implicitly theory dependent and paradigm dependent. Let me say, in order to analyze any given set of information, even the most basic thing, let me tell you, please look in your room, all the objects that are in red, for instance. When I'm talking about red, we are using some very basic knowledge or very basic theoretical approach of what is red and which is the difference between red and brown, for instance. But the concept of red not necessarily is the same in each individual. So we have to take into account that we are looking and analyzing every object, every part of this universe. We are always using some sort of theory approach or some sort of paradigm on how to look for that given object. And we have to make this explicitly, because when you make this explicitly, you might understand that some people are talking about things that are using the same terms. For instance, the concept of innovation. The concept of innovation is very different according to the type of theoretical approach that you are using to define that concept of innovation. And if we make some sort of survey today and ask the different participants of this workshop what innovation is, probably we will have different definitions, and not necessarily all of them will be correct according to different methodological approach. So here on, you have to take in mind that for measuring everything, you always need some sort of theoretical approach. And let me tell you that let's us make a very brief account on the evolution of main research and innovation policies that were implemented around the world in the last 80 years. Each different periods, we always find a theoretical approach which is behind the different policies and ecosystems that were organized. Before the Second World War, there was no explicit science and technology public policy. Research and innovation before the Second World War were driven by the industrial sector and by the military armed races. Essentially, were a demand side, the demand side track the different policies that were implemented. But after the Second World War, the first social contract was established by Vannevar-Bush document that was prepared for President Roosevelt, called Science, the Endless Frontier. And the first science and technology explicit policies appear with the goal of maximizing the outputs of research and innovation by applying specific incentives, mechanisms, and policy instruments based on the so-called linear model of science, which was focused on the supply side. The idea was to foster the fundamental science in order to have excellent applied science that eventually will promote the development of new technologies, and the development of new technologies will promote the innovation, and eventually the innovation will be transformed into economic growth. That was the sequential organization of this first social contract of science. And between 1960 and 1988, UNESCO played a fundamental role diffusing the creation of national institutions to design and promote and monitor science policy worldwide, assuming that the correct way of doing that was by using the linear model of science. I would like to make a stop here to particularly mention the extraordinary figure of Ibn Khaldun, who was born in Tunis in 1332 and passed away in Cairo in 1406. He's considered as one of the fathers of the sociology. Probably the closest, and he developed a theoretical framework in order to analyze history. He eventually proposed a paradigm to understand the history. And he defined that paradigm, he represented that paradigm by representing history as a sequence of regular cycles of strengthening and weakening of asabaya. I don't know if I pronounce the word correct, but this asabaya is a very strong concept. Literally means the fiber of the sinew by which a group is held together. It is that which binds people into effective groups when asabaya is strong and there is legitimacy. When it's weak, dynasties fall, empires are conquered, and a new group with stronger asabaya rises. The rise and fall is the rise and fall of unity, identity, and legitimacy, or in one word, asabaya. Probably the closest translation into English of the word asabaya is synergy. And is synergy. And for the lack of asabaya, probably the closest translation with the antagonism. Khaldun considered that the origin of the rise and fall mechanism was based on the different generations that are replacing all ideas with new ones, all policy with new ones, all institutions with new ones. Almost 3 decades ago, I have the privilege to work with my friend and mentor, Professor Carlos Malman, at the University of Buenos Aires, who unfortunately passed away a few months ago. With him, we developed a mathematical model to explain these societal dynamics, which can also be used to understand the long-term dynamics of research and innovation policies and ecosystems. Here we represent a simplified version of the implementation and evolution of the most recent techno-economic and organizational paradigms, each one associated with a specific social contract of science. I really do not have time for all the details, but let me tell you that each individual paradigm has 4 different phases associated with the rules, policies, and institutions that will govern the operation of research and innovation activities. The first one is the formulation of that paradigm. Then the organization of that, the second one is the organization of that given paradigm, the new set of rules. When all the ecosystem is organized following the new rules. The third phase is the action, when the ecosystem is working in a synergetic state or with the highest level of asabaya action. And the final stage is questioning, when the new generations start questioning the now all rules and proposes new policies, new institutions, new sets of values. The phases of organization and action, these 2 phases, have the highest level of synergies, while questioning and formulation, the highest level of antagonism. So we have a sequence of synergy and antagonism, synergy and antagonism. It is very interesting to realize that after the formulation of the previous paradigm, the one that was designed by the seminal document of Vannevar Bush and published in 1945, all the scientific, after the publication of that report that was prepared for President Franklin Delano Roosevelt this document organized all the scientific research in a way that all the systems and policy intervention were following the linear model of science, focusing in the supply side, assuming that if you have an excellent fundamental science, you might eventually have an impact in the economic growth. However, and I have to note that particularly in the middle of this synergetic period, the Science Policy Division at UNESCO appeared. The Science Policy Division was the first, UNESCO was the first international organization which founded a Science Policy Division at that time. And since then, until the late 80s, the UNESCO was responsible for spreading the policies and institutional ecosystems. For example, the National Councils of Research, the Councils of Science and Technology, and these were the type of model that at that time UNESCO were spreading around the world. And particularly, the first case of implementing a National Council of Research was within an Arab state. It was in Lebanon. Yeah, and as early as 1960, the first task taken by the Science Policy Division of UNESCO was the creation of the National Research Council in Lebanon, just to show. These policies were very successful. This intervention of UNESCO were very successful, particularly in Latin America. At that time, most of the countries founded their own national councils of research, following this first social contract of science. But of course, after the oil crisis and the world started changing, and people and the new generations realized that this previous model were not the best one, particularly for the developing countries. This model requires also a very strong demand side, a very strong industry, a very strong productive sector in the country that should be demanding the results of science. And in most of the developing countries, this demand side didn't exist. So people start questioning this old paradigm. And between the late 80s and 1999, a new social contract of science was proposed during the last World Conference on Science, and where a new social contract with new set of values were proposed. This new contract includes a big set of values which were not considered in the previous paradigm, such as sustainability, climate change, biodiversity, water management, women in science, innovation, international cooperation, global issues, transdisciplinary science. This new social contract of science is under the umbrella of what we can call now sustainability science. And it is very interesting to see that, again, the first global sustainability development goals were set up to the year 2030, exactly in the middle of the new synergic period of time. And I prepared this graph several years ago. It was by 2012, I prepared this graph analyzing these issues. At that time, it was very clear for me that we were driving now new set of institutions, new set of policies driven by the sustainability science paradigm. At that time, I have no idea about the new recommendation. But for this lecture, I make this example. See what happened with the previous recommendation. The very first recommendation of the status of the scientific researchers was prepared by UNESCO in November of 1974. And the new one on November of 2017, both of them in the same period, in the period of action, on the when the highest synergy of the previous paradigm in both cases. And in this case, the set of values that were included in this original 1974 recommendation were based on the previous paradigm using the linear model of science. However, in this new 2017 recommendation, we are using a new set of values, a new theoretical framework, a new paradigm on how we organize science, technology, and innovation activities, policies, and policy instruments. And obviously, the type of institutes are different. So during the first set of the first paradigm, the linear model of science, UNESCO were working very hard in different regions. And I want to mention the case of the first Casta Arab regional conference that was organized in Rabat in August of 1976, where all the countries were together in order how to transform the science and technology activities in the Arab regions. And we'll come back later to this. But if you look at the recent type of publication that covers the Arab states, new words appear. For instance, innovation, economic growth, innovation policy for inclusive sustainable development, innovation landscape. You see, the way we are seeing things now are using a different theoretical framework that allows us to think in different types of policy interventions, different types of institutions, and different objectives and goals that we want to achieve with those policy interventions. Let's go back to Rabat and to show you, this is an example to show how difficult it is to implement and to achieve the different goals, how difficult it is to implement a given policy. In 1976, UNESCO organized in Rabat the Casta Arab. That was the first conference of ministers of Arab states responsible for the application of science and technology to development. In the recommendation to the member states, and they suggested that no less than 0.5% of the gross national product of every Arab state should be invested on research and development activities by the end of the 70s. On the other hand, the whole Arab states should reach around 1% of the aggregate gross national product of the whole Arab states. As a region, it was suggested that the region should, as a whole, spend 1% of the GDP on R&D activities. They also propose that a minimum number of 500 full-time equivalent researchers per million inhabitants should be reached by the individual nation by the end of the 1970s. And let's take a look at what had happened after this. In this graph, we represent the gross expenditure of research on research and development, called by us with the acronym of GER, as a percentage of the GDP. All the available data for the whole set of Arab countries are here, which means that there are several countries that are not here, that never produce a single number of measures related with R&D indicators. For instance, that is the case of Lebanon, Yemen, and I don't remember what other country, and Djibouti, for instance. We can see in this graph, we represent all the data from 1980 to 1918, which is to 2018, which is the last data available at the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. You will see that this line represents the 0.5% of the GDP on R&D, and this represents 1% of the GDP on R&D. Originally, the Declaration of Rabat proposes that all the countries should be investing 0.5% of the GDP by 1980, and the whole region should be investing 1% of the GDP. Taking a look to the real data, only Sudan achieved the original goal to reach, was the first Arab country to reach the 0.5% of the GDP on R&D by the year 1998. But after that, the investment on R&D from Sudan decreased in a constant way. But today, we have several countries that are investing more than 0.5% of the GDP. You have Qatar, Malta, Tunisia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates. Emirates in the last 10 years changed the profile of the country in terms of R&D. Even today, the Emirates and Saudi Arabia are the two countries which are investing the largest number on R&D activities as a fraction of their own GDP. I want also to mention that this line represents the whole Arab states. Remember that in the Casta Arab meeting, they were proposing that the whole Arab states should be investing at least 1% of the GDP. Today, the whole Arab states group is investing 0.6% of the GDP. So these type of goals are very difficult to obtain, very difficult to achieve. We have clearly a very successful case of the Emirates, but clearly the economic situation of the Emirates is not the same economic situation of the whole set of the Arab states. So the boundary conditions of the country, the contextual factors are things that you have to take into account when you are designing policies. For instance, let's take a look to the second type of what happened with the human resources. Only the goal was that they should have 500 full-time equivalent researchers per million inhabitants by the end of the 70s. But no country reached that number until the year 2002. But today, the Emirates, Malta, Tunisia, these three countries are having around 2,000 full-time equivalent researchers per million inhabitants, while Morocco, Algeria, Egypt, Jordan, and Qatar are having between 500 and 1,000 full-time equivalent researchers per million inhabitants. What are these two graphs showing us? That for research and innovation policies and ecosystems, you need to think in terms of decades. In many cases, government design policy intervention thinking only in the supply side, for example, promoting research in the academia. However, the most important policy intervention is also associated by promoting R&D and innovation activities within the demand side or within the productive sector of the country. And in general, we have a lack of that type of policy intervention. Let me show that in general, we mentioned before that each individual indicator is always associated with some theoretical framework. sometimes those indicators are not very well used, because sometimes the indicators are used to compare one country to another country, while the important thing is to compare with the previous version of that country and to see whether those indicators present some sort of scaling patterns, showing how the different indicators are correlated with the growth between them. For instance, here we have the number of scientific articles published by Egypt against time, and the number of scientific articles per million inhabitants. In the second graph, we have the gross expenditure on R&D as a percentage of the GDP. And we see that in both cases, we have some sort of scaling pattern. The same type of, the same shape of curve are presented in these two graphs, that showing that there is a correlation. When you have more investment on R&D, eventually this is transformed in a larger number of publications. On the other, in this graph, we show the correlation, the linear correlation between the number of full-time equivalent researchers and the scientific articles. It is clear a linear correlation. And here, the number of the gross expenditure on R&D as a percentage of GDP against the scientific article. Again, there is a linear correlation. What I'm saying here is, in order to see whether the production of indicators are good or bad in a given country, you need to check the long temporal series of indicators and how those indicators correlate with each other. Because the system, the research and innovation system as a whole, should behave like a plant. When they are growing in a proportional way. So you are, when you see these things and you analyze these things in different countries, sometimes you don't see this type of correlation, which is a clear indicator that probably some of the indicators, the R&D indicators, are not well estimated, particularly with the number of researchers that are conducting research, and sometimes with the estimation of the amount of money that are used specifically on R&D activities. Okay, so when we started analyzing these things in UNESCO, we realized that the indicators per se were not necessarily appropriated to understand the behavior of the national research and innovation system. Usually, when we are looking only at the indicators, we are like a person walking and walking in the dark. And because of that, we start thinking in a different way. We have to mention here that the original approach to define the R&D indicators can be traced to the early 60s, when two economists, Fritz Machlup and Christopher Freeman, one from the US and the other from the UK, proposed a traditional economic input-output matrix to analyze the behavior of R&D indicators. Since then, the OECD and other international organizations have been collecting and publishing an important set of input and output R&D indicators, and a set of manuals and guidelines to generate them. The most famous one is the Frascati manual. Okay, but at UNESCO we said, how suitable are these Frascati manual family to generate evidence-based policies? Because they are analyzing input indicators, output indicators. You have different examples of that. I will not read the view graph, you can read it. in order to analyze the performance of the National Research and Innovation System. But because they are using input and output indicators, they are treating the National Research and Innovation System as a black box. We don't know what is happening there. Moreover, this black box is inserted in a context of national and international contextual factors, geopolitics, fluxes of goods, information, human and financial resources that in each individual country may be responsible of changing the values of all these different set of input and output indicators. So with GoSpin, with the GoSpin methodological framework, we propose to the opening of that black box by measuring the implementation and impact of the SETI policy instruments. So if we want to analyze that, we need to understand which is inside the black box, which transform the input indicators into the output indicator, which is inside there. And we think that at the policy interventions, or what we call the operational policy instruments, and here we represent the most classical mechanisms that can be competitive funds, scholarship, tax incentives, priority settings and funds allocation, venture capitals, and so on and so forth, that are the mechanisms that generates and transform the input indicators into output indicators. So the idea was to collect information on those policy instruments. The policy instruments are the means employed by those who exercise power and authority to influence the decisions made by the other agents. They induce and motivate individuals, groups, firms, organizations, and institutions to behave, that is an asabaya, in accordance with the guidelines and criteria established by the policies, and they are the connecting link between the purpose expressed in a given policy or a policy statement and the implementation in practice. So are the incentives in order to change the present behavior into a given objective and goal that is expressed in a given policy. And this is a simplified version on how the research and innovation system works. Obviously, the real ecosystems are much more complex, with a great variety of stakeholders and different links among them. However, this version is especially useful for didactic purposes. Let's start with the government, parliament, and ministries, which usually allocate public finances through different operational policy instruments like funding agencies, grants, loans, equity funding, competitive funds, matching funds, seed capital, and venture capitals. Obviously, those funds allocation can be oriented to university, governmental research centers, universities, non-profit organizations, or eventually to the private sector too. So the idea is, by introducing these incentives, the universities and eventually the private sector too will generate new technology, knowledge, and skills that will be used in order to improve the productivity of that private business enterprise sector. And by improving the productivity, we have the opportunity to improve also the cumulative taxes, and then we can shut down this virtuous cycle. Obviously, this is a very ideal way of seeing things, but it is very didactic to understand but that the purpose of the GoSpin program is to create a complete map of all these instruments and all these arrows that connects the policy interventions between the different stakeholders in a given country. So this is probably the most important graph in the whole presentation. And here we present the structure of the GoSpin analytic units. We have, first of all, we have the policy. The policy is a document. The policy per se alone is only a piece of literature. It does not mean anything if it is not implemented. So how this policy can be implemented? It can be implemented through a set of different policy instruments. First of all, you have the legal framework, which includes law, decrees, regulation, by law, contracts, and international agreements. The second way that it is very important is how you organize your national research and innovation system in terms of institutions, which are the different roles that different institutions plays within the system, and which are the links between the different organizations. And third, the set of different policy instruments that are in place in order to change the present situation into a given goal or objective in the future. However, when we start analyzing the different countries, we see that several countries, we find a set of pathologies of instruments, which are translated into failures in policy implementation. We have countries that, here we have the STI policy, the legal framework, organization chart, operational policy instrument in order to generate effects. But there are countries that they have the policy, they have the organizational chart, they have the operational policy instrument, but they don't have any legal instrument. And this was the case of all Latin American countries within the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The Latin American countries start producing legal framework only in the 80s. There are other countries that they have the policy, they have the legal framework, the organizational chart, but no single operational policy instrument in place. They usually come to UNESCO asking, we have problems in the implementation. Of course, they will have problems in the implementation because they never think how to create specific operational policy instruments in order to implement a given policy. Several African countries are in this situation. And they have the most absurd cases that they have the policy, but they don't have any legal instrument, they don't have a real organizational chart, and they don't have operational policy instrument. They only have a piece of paper saying we have the policy and nothing else. And you can eventually have other countries that they have the legal framework, the organizational chart, the operational policy instrument, but they don't have a document, an official document saying this is the policy. In general, they have a very strong organizational chart, and each institution has its own policy. And we have several countries that are in this situation, are in general more advanced countries. And the problem that they have is that in some cases they have superposition of tasks. There are different ministries doing the same thing. So in some cases, the left hand do not know what the right hand is doing. And these are the type of pathologies that you can always find there. However, the previous case was the most simple way of analyzing the reality, but the reality usually is much more complex. And in general, we need to distinguish between what we call explicit policies, that are the policies that are expressed in that document, STI policy, and other policies that might be affecting also the performance of the implementation of the science, technology, and innovation policy, that are policies related with education, economy, industry, environment, health, so on and so forth. So in general, we can talk about development policies, and the development policy will have a different set of legal frameworks, each legal framework designed in order to implement a given area, let's say environment, health, agriculture, energy, and then you have a different set of organizational structure under the umbrella, for instance, of the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Industry, Environment, Education, Health, so on, and Ministry of Science and Technology. And each ministry will have a set of different operational policy instruments. So what happened? If you analyze the SETI policy, well, it's the policy that correlates with the legal framework associated with science, technology, and innovation that is implemented with the Ministry of Science and Technology, and they have a set of given effects. But sometimes the goals and objectives are not achieved because we have other policies that are implicit policies that are affecting the performance of this explicit policy. And why is that? Because there is a lack of coordination between all the legal instruments. For instance, you can have some custom policies that prevent the country to receive high-tech equipment by asking huge taxes. So a given laboratory in the country is buying a new equipment, and then they have to remain that equipment in the custom because they don't have enough funds to pay the custom taxes and fees. So, and there is no coordination with that custom policy with the STI policy, or you have a migration policy that do not allow people from abroad to come to the country and to work in a research center there, and they affect that policy. Or you have an economic policy that promotes buying foreign technology, and by doing that, they do not allow people who are in the country trying to generate innovation, because they have to compete with their own products, with products that the country is buying abroad. So these implicit policies sometimes are more important than the explicit policy when you are analyzing the behavior and the performance of the system. So you have to analyze this type of things too. However, you also have a lack of coordination between the institutions. Sometimes the Ministry of Finance do not hear what the Ministry of Science and Technology is doing, and the Ministry of Science and Technology is not hearing what the Ministry of Education is doing, and the policies that are implementing policies. So there is a lack of coordination. Usually, some developed countries solve this problem by having some sort of parliamentary commission on science and technology in order to coordinate all the legal framework and to edit the different policy interventions through the legal system. And in some countries, they have some sort of interministerial cabinet of science and technology, where all the ministers that play a key role in science, technology, and innovation activities are there taking decisions together in order to coordinate all the policy instruments and policy interventions. But you have also to take into account that there are other things that are affecting the performance. that are the contextual factors, historical factors, geopolitics, political stability, violence in the country. All those things affect in a direct way the performance of the R&D system. In GoSpin, we try to measure all this. We try to see how the National Development Plan coordinates with the STI plan, with the SDG plan, how they interact with the civil society, with the development partners, with university, academia, industries, entrepreneurs, so on and so forth. And particularly within the country profiles, we try to measure the contextual factors to understand which are the socio-cultural factors, the internal structure factor, the external structure factors, the international factors, regional factors, and to see which are the gaps that each given country has. But let me tell you one other thing, and in this presentation, I am trying to enhance the fact that the research and development indicators are very sensitive to the boundary conditions of the country, to the contextual factors of the country, and particularly to the political stability of the country. And let me show you some examples. Usually, national research and innovation activities are extremely sensitive to the behavioral, political stability, violence, economic performance, national contextual factors, or societal synergy. Here, for instance, we present the temporal evolution in the production of scientific articles in Senegal and Rwanda against time. And here we see a big drop here, and then start back again. The same happened in Rwanda. This big drop was generated by the implementation of the strong structural adjustment policy promoted by international organizations that said countries like Senegal do not need to do any R&D. That was in the late 80s and in the 90s. And in the case of Rwanda, by this time we have a genocide. In both cases, when the political disappear, a new growth in the production of articles appeared. And when the country in Rwanda, after the genocide, achieved certain stability, again, we have a very strong growth in the production of papers. But these things are correlated also with the number of full-time equivalent researchers. In both cases, the publications are produced by researchers. If you don't have researchers, you will not have publications. And this boundary condition, these contextual factors affects directly the work of the scientific researchers and the possibility that the scientific researchers remains in their own institutions, or they might emigrate to other countries in order to continue with their own research. And let me give you some clear examples that I showed this example for the first time during the training in Amman a few years ago. The case, and the lady from Kuwait will probably remain, but this graph, I will show these two graphs are in a semi-logarithmic scales. In the vertical axis, we represent the number of articles in a logarithmic scale, while in the horizontal axis, we present the data in a linear scale. So in this type of graph, when you see a straight line, you are really seeing an exponential growth. And the slope of the line is related with the rate of growth, the growth rate. So you see the case of Kuwait before the invasion of Iraq was growing very fast. After After the war, there was a big drop. The same happened in Iraq. However, after the war, in the growth rate in the production of scientific articles in Kuwait is lower than before the war. On the contrary, in the case of Iraq, after the war, after this big drop, they start producing scientific articles in a faster way. Similar thing happened in Lebanon, for instance. We have data in Lebanon since the late 50s. We have exponential growth in the production of articles until the Civil War. Here, this gap that is here is generated by the database. In 1973, the Science Citation Index, which is the database that I used to prepare this graph, have a gap in the number of articles. Here they are considering only one part of the database, and here they start considering the whole set of journals. So there is a gap in 1973. So you have to take into account that probably this line will be in this position because there are a number of articles that are not here. So during the Civil War, there was an exponential decrease in the number of publication of articles. But after the Civil War, in Lebanon, they start growing back again with the similar slope, with the similar growth rate. So again, political stability, violence are things that affect directly the behavior of the national research and innovation system. Okay, let's take a quick look at what is happening about all the members of the Islamic Development Bank, all the countries in green that goes beyond the Arab states group. But I prepared this graph when we make the institutional survey, Gospin study of the Islamic Development Bank, and I think that it will be very useful to show the point on how the production of research is very sensitive to the governance conditions of a given country. And for instance, the Islamic Development Bank has 57 member countries. Here we represent those countries in a Cartesian graph by using two governance indicators which were measured by the World Bank. In the horizontal axis, we represent the political stability over the absence of violence and terrorism for the year 2015. While in the left part, we have negative values, and in the right part, we have positive values of that indicator. On the other hand, in the vertical axis, we represent the government effectiveness in this axis in the implementation of policies. Here, in the inferior part, we represent the negative values, while in the superior part, we represent the positive values. And the size of the bubbles represents the number of scientific publications per million inhabitants in each given country. The first clear, we have done this for all the countries in the world, and the pattern that you observe is that in the first Cartesian quadrant, which have positive values of political stability and government effectiveness, the size of the bubbles as the biggest one. In the second quadrant, where you have positive values of government effectiveness in the implementation of policies and negative values in terms of political stability over the absence of violence, you might also have some big bubbles and some small bubbles. However, The smallest bubbles are in the third quadrant, when you have negative values for both indicators. Here, for instance, a small value represents only 10 scientific articles per million inhabitants, while the case of Switzerland is around 4,000 scientific articles per million inhabitants per year. No? And here you have these countries where the bubbles are very big. Here in the second quadrant, you also have the cases of Saudi, Bahrain, and in the third quadrant, probably the exception are Tunisia and Iran, which productivity of articles per capita are relatively big. Is around some 800 per million inhabitants, around that. So the idea here is that political stability and government effectiveness in the implementation of public policies during decades is a necessary condition for improving the performance of research and innovation activities. You need to have both things: good governance in order to achieve the goals that you have established in order to obtain a good R&D and innovation policies in your country. And let's finish this part giving some examples on what had happened in China. In China, by 1995, they were investing only 0.5% of the GDP on R&D activities, but they set a goal to reach the 2% of the GDP on R&D by the year 2015. And the reality is not only they achieved that goal, but they also were investing more than that. And when you are considering, and this is huge, when you are considering also that the growth rate of the economy was around 7% per year. So they were investing more money on R&D activities than 7% increase per year in order to achieve this goal. But what had happened in China when you are looking at the production of scientific articles compared with the US? And here we have again a semi-logarithm scale. Here the straight lines represent exponentials, and I prepared this graph in 2018, and I forecast the date of 2018 as the date when the numbers of publications produced in China will be more than the numbers of scientific articles produced in the US. And if you read one of the covers in the very famous journal Nature by the year 2018, this prediction was already achieved. China today is the largest producer of scientific articles in the world. And how did China produce this goal? When you look about the long-term evolution in the number of full-time equivalent researchers in the US was growing in a linear way. These are the data. While in China, there is no other country in the world that were growing the number of full-time equivalent researchers as China. They were growing to the power of 3 in a cubic way. And how China was able to do that? They was able because they introduced an extraordinarily higher education reform, allowing today to produce around 60,000 new PhD each year, while back in the year 1982, China was producing less than 100 PhD per year. Today, they are producing 60,000 PhD per year. No other country can do that without an extraordinary higher education reform. And again, these indicators are correlated with other type of things that we are trying to measure in GoSpin, which are the evolution of the different institutions. And here we are looking at the technology policy framework of one of the provinces in China, just the Jiangsu province, which has around 100 million inhabitants. You will see the evolution in the different, the institutional evolution of the R&D institution in that province since the 1980 to the year 2007, how the complexity was growing against time. But it was not only the complexity of the institution. When you are counting the type of operational policy instruments in terms of administrative mechanism, financial mechanism, fiscal and taxes mechanism, human resources mechanism, and other economic mechanisms, the central government of China was increasing the number of operational policy instruments to a total of around 600 different operational policy instruments, plus another 600 operational policy instruments in the Jiangsu province. So that province have a combination of more than 1,000 different operational policy interventions and different type of mechanisms in order to promote innovation. So we need to map these type of things that are the relevant things that change the landscape of R&D. And for doing that, as I mentioned before, we have the so-called legal framework that might be also considered as a set of legal instruments or legal devices, which embodies the policy or parts of it in a form of law, decree, or regulation. Formal agreements, contracts, and international safety cooperation treaties may also be included in this category. So in GovSpring, we are collecting information in order to generate a huge database of this type of policy instrument. And particularly, the inventory of the legal framework is the most relevant database to monitor most of the items in the 2017 recommendation. And let me give you the type of classification that we have. We have tomorrow, probably I will, in the first part of tomorrow, I will describe the GovSpring surveys, but we have one classification scheme where we collect information on the regulation of open science, tax incentives, higher education system, bioethics, and ethics of science and technology, to ensuring responsible research and innovation, regulation on the personnel, on the research lab safety, on nuclear, chemical, and other dangerous substances, on gender equality, on inclusive and green technology, on indigenous knowledge system, on intellectual property. All those items are included in this recommendation. So having the information on this, we can map how a given country is really implementing the legal framework in order to promote or to regulate activities within all these different topics. Another important thing is how the system is organized in taking into account the different institutions. And to understand the topological characteristics of the research and innovation ecosystems, which are key for the policy implementation. If each time, for instance, a new government is replaced and the new government changes the institutional framework and redesigns the SETI policies, the possibility of achieving success is extremely low. So usually you need several decades of continuous support to start seeing changes. And let me tell you, probably the most successful case is the case of Singapore, who changed completely the landscape of the country by having a very strong organizational system. I will not go into detail. Probably I talk about these things when we perform the complete training, but just to give an example, that we usually collect a full a complete survey, and we generate a complete inventory of all the different type of institutions that are in place in the country within the government, higher education sector, the business enterprise sector, and the private non-profit sector. And when we have all this information, then we try to generate first to map the policy cycle system that are to identify which are the institutions that are in charge of the agenda setting, the policy formulation, the decision making, the policy implementation, and the policy evaluation. When you put all together in a graph like this, and you see that the same institution is in charge of everything, you will have a problem. Usually, you will need to have different type of institution in charge of these different functions in order for the system to work in a good way. So this is a very good source of detecting gaps in the policy implementation when you map and create a map of the institution in this way. The other map that we create is the way it is organized in order to function. We put all together all the organizations that are in charge of the policy planning level, which are the organizations that are in charge of the promotion level. The second level is, which means institution in charge of providing funding or providing regulation of activities. Then you have the institutions that are in charge of the performance level, which are the institution that really performs R&D and innovation activities. And then you have another level with the institution that provides scientific and technological service that are, for instance, a geological survey is providing service. A meteorological office is also providing scientific and technological information, or an office of patents, or you have different institutions that are related with science and technology, but are not really producing R&D activities, but they are producing services, and we are collecting information on that. This graph is missing one part that we were unable to find, only with the exception of the case of Japan, that there should be another independent group of institutions that should be in charge of the evaluation. The evaluation it is recommended to be independent from all the other activities. However, with the exception of the case of Japan, we were unable to identify in other countries the evaluation independent in an institution independently from the other group of institutions. And this is also a very important gap that the system should be taken into consideration. Finally, and I will finish the second part with the next two view graphs, we have the operational policy instruments. And in the operational policy instruments, I am representing here different type of mechanisms. You have grants for R&D, you may have grants, incubators, public and private venture capital funds, and these different type of mechanisms are located in the different stages of the innovation process. You have the first stage is related with R&D, then you have a stage related with the demonstration process, the deployment process, diffusion of the innovation, and commercial maturity. And this is very useful to see whether these mechanisms are available for all the different stages in the innovation process. Most of the developing countries, they only have policy instrument for the first part, for the R&D. Most related with the previous theoretical framework of the linear model of science, assuming that if you have good R&D activities, you are eventually will end with the commercialization of a new innovation. And that is not really true. The landscape is much more complex, and you need to introduce different sort of policy interventions in different stages in order to achieve that final goal. And let me show you here a layout of the GoSpin platform. Here we are presenting the operational policy instrument against the categories by standardized objectives and goals. We represent a list of 4 different objectives and goals, and we classify the policy instruments in the country. Today, we have around 1,200 different individual policy instruments that are implemented in the list of 70 developing countries in the database. And one of the classifications schemes that has each individual operational policy instrument is this one. And I will not read all the items, but you will recognize that several of these items has a direct relation with the items in the 2017 recommendation. And this table represents the countries and the number of operational policy instruments that are in place. If you click here, you enter to a new level of description. You will find the complete list. In this case, we have Argentina. We have 43 different policy instruments related with strengthening the production of new endogenous scientific knowledge. If I click here, I got the complete list with the description of those individual policy instruments. And if I select one of those 43 different operational policy instruments, I obtain the complete description with the 25 different fields that are needed in order to describe each individual policy instrument. And the database is cross-correlated with each other. You can select, for instance, which are all the policy instruments related with strengthening programs on science education at all levels for all the countries, and you will get all the list of all those operational policy instruments that are there, or you can select which are the countries that promote a specific SDG, because all the operational policy instruments and also the legal framework are directly related with an SDG. You can choose a given SDG and see which are all the operational policy instruments of the legal framework related with that specific SDG. And you have a really very big amount of possibilities in order to combine the information. Let me tell you that the GoSpin platform is a very complex platform. It takes around 2 hours to describe just to describe all the options that you have in order to access the information. And it is also so complex that it takes a lot of time to upload the information. And there are things that the platform is prepared to have that unfortunately UNESCO didn't invest enough resources to complete that information. So we hope that in the next few years, you will get all sorts of new information that the software is already prepared to show in this platform. And I will finish this part showing that again the same view graph that I presented before, showing that all the items in red, all the items in red that are included in the 2017 platform, we have information in the GoSpin platform related with them. Only the number 33, 39, 41, 43, 44, 45, 47, and 48 are not included yet in the platform. There are plans to reform the platform in such a way to include the missing information, but also to present the information in a more easy way for the people who will be looking for the information specifically related with the recommendation. And with this, we open the floor for 15 minutes of question. I don't know.
Thank you very much, Guillermo. I mean, you did a fantastic job of really presenting all this dense information in such a comprehensive way. Now, of course, we are 15 minutes behind schedule. But I think if participants, we thank them for bearing with us and staying. So if maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions, and if not, we can take some questions tomorrow also. Let me see if there are any participants who would like to raise their hands or give a question. I don't see raised hands. I think yeah. I mean, yeah, we went a little bit behind the schedule, but I think we'll give the chance tomorrow morning, I guess, for some questions. I think so. So today, basically, we had Guillermo provided he described the different dimensions of reporting against the recommendation using GoSpin and gave a very good presentation on the GoSpin methodological approach and analytical units. And we hope to continue tomorrow with him also to see how to complete the national surveys on GoSpin. And tomorrow also we will focus on how to address gaps in evidence in a quick and efficient way. So I think we can stop at that. I see my colleague April, who had some problems joining this morning. I don't know if you want to say just a quick hi before we close, April.
Hello to you all. I'm sorry that I missed the opening, but I know that we went immediately into the more dense material. The GoSpin platform needs to be understood as a whole. I think the reporting exercise, the aim we have is to make sure that you're able to report in a way that's efficient and easy. And now that the decision was made to put it into GoSpin, we needed to give you the overview. But obviously, this is a work in progress. And when you start working with data, the more you develop and work with the data, it will become better and better over time. So probably in this first run, it doesn't have to be perfect, but in 4 years' time, we will see improvements. Thank you so much for joining the training.
Oh, of course. And some participants are asking about the presentation. We'll make it available, of course, after the event, as well as the recording. We have a suggestion to have a live exercise. I don't know if that would be possible technically for us, or that would require definitely a lot more time, I imagine, Guillermo, right?
To show the platform, to show how the platform works. Yeah. To show everything we did in Kenya, it took us 2 hours to show how it works.
Maybe we can schedule something subsequently. So I think we can stop at that, and then just alert again the participants that tomorrow we will be starting 1 hour earlier, so noon time Cairo. So 1 hour again earlier. And I thank Guillermo again and all the participants for their attention. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Can we remain? I have to make you some questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillermo. This is Nazar.
Thank you for your patience too. Thank you, the interpreters. Thank you very much to the interpreters.
Thank you very much,
a very difficult task.
Guillermo. Thank you.
Every time you say SETI is so quick in English. But I yes, we'll make the presentation available, of course, to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. What about the
recording, is it going to be available as well?
Yes, yes, absolutely. We'll make the recording available in English and Arabic.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Jana. Thank you, Dr. Nazar.
Okay, thanks. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay.
Excellent material, Yermo. Thank you. Really, I enjoyed.
No, it was such for me. The basic ideas in 1 hour and a half. It really was a real good thing for me.
Squeeze.
Because also because English is not my first language, and sometimes I want to speak fast, but I also have the limitation of the translation. So
exactly. No, the fact that you're not speaking fast is excellent because otherwise the translation would not work.
So
No,
in principle, the third part is missing. Really, the third part is the description of the forms. In my experience, this part is going fast because you just read, say, you have to do this, this, and this, and we have some examples. The problem is tomorrow I should have only half an hour, the complete set, including the questions, or which way is like that?
We had scheduled some 15 minutes for you, right?
15 minutes.
That's according to, but that was supposed to, because you were supposed to start today or partly, so I'm not sure.
No, it was, I thought that I tried to do my best, but now let me tell you, the missing part is the part that is described in the document. Okay, in the document I provide how to fill the different templates of the GoSpin survey. In general, is very self-explanatory, the document, because you look at the instructions in the appendixes and you can do it very fast. What I can do is to present particularly in some detail the legal framework, which is probably the most relevant part for the recommendation, and to show very briefly the operational policy instruments in order to do it in 15 minutes. It's the only way. But
what do you think, April?
I want to see. Yes?
I think you should take into account the question that was just raised. Could they see how you enter into the system as an administrator? It's a very practical question. I realize
no. Let me tell you, you cannot enter as an administrator. Not today, because we don't have a person in headquarters to do that. No. That cannot be done. No, cannot be done until it is possible to be done, but it is not practically cannot be done because there is nobody who can supervise that, and you need to have a specialized person.
Okay. Well, perhaps then, when you have to cut it short, just refer them to the documents, because a lot of it is self-explanatory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, any other thing that you want me to mention in the 15 minutes tomorrow?
You can take a half an hour. I'm cutting mine
I will
shorter.
be very sleepy. It will be 7 a.m. for me, and so I have to wake up at 5.
No, it's very normal. It's very normal, and you did a great job. Congratulations, Guillermo. I know it's a lot to cover, but also the ideas have now been covered, so tomorrow should go more easily. And I think you should take it half an hour, because we kind of knew that the third part might be slipping, and we'll see how it goes. because if it's necessary, I'm going to cut back my part, and it's easy for me to cut back my part.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay,
So I'll just be standing by.
We had said 15 minutes plus discussion, but again, yeah, I mean, we can.
But the other possibility that I mentioned before is eventually to be at the end, because in order to allow Eric not to be pressed by the time because he had to deliver this lecture, because the remaining thing is how to fill how to complete the information. That can be done at the end. And in that way, Eric is not pressed. If I extend a little bit, I'm not taking his time. That is my humble suggestion, but I don't know.
Maybe that's correct. Maybe you're right. Yeah. Why don't? Okay. In that case, it would be my part, Eric's part, and then you.
I think so.
And it's better for timing.
I think so,
yeah.
For everybody.
Okay. Yeah. We'll do it this way tomorrow.
Well, I'll alert Eric to that also.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Guillermo.
Okay, thank you very much to you for giving me the opportunity to be here today.
I think it was a marathon. It was really but very difficult.
And to talk to the Arab world.
You did a fantastic job. In fact, I loved the information, the statistics that you gave also on the
examples. I make examples in order to get the people interested. But let me tell you, in order to understand the subtleties that are behind that, you need more time.
Yeah,
because
of course.
I show this to catch the attention of the people, but in order to allow them to understand, you need to go deep.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you.
All
right.
Bye.
See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
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 Bye.